Hello, I'm Mark Williams, and earlier in 2021, Gethin Ellis and myself started the PHIT Podcast. Here at gethinellis.com and Wide End Limited, we know that whilst physical fitness is essential, our mental health is vital too, and our PHIT Podcast is all about putting the human back into technology, aka FIT. Building on us all coping during unprecedented times in Series 1, available on our website www.gethinellis.com and YouTube, search for Gethin Ellis, we felt in Series 2 it might help us all to hear more thoughts and advice from normal, everyday humans just like you. So we're again speaking with a range of humans in technology, business, consulting and other areas to hear what they've learned and how they intend to apply that experience in dealing with today's challenges and their futures. Right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode in Series 2 of the PHIT Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Simon Ellis. So welcome, Simon. Simon and I worked for Simon, a few years ago now, and Simon has been in the asset management industry for a considerable period of time. I think I'm allowed to say over 30 years. And he's had a variety of roles, of course, but many senior executive type roles within that sphere. I think the right way of phrasing it, he's now pursuing a portfolio career and mixing up, some general advisory type interests. Well, I know he's got one or two personal interests as well, which we might get to during this call. So welcome to Simon. And Simon, should we just start? Shall we ask you the first question?
Yes, please. Yeah, fire away.
Jolly good. So tell us a little bit about yourself, or where you've come from, what you do, what your interests are, what your roles have been, that kind of thing.
Well, I'm not going to tell you the whole book, but to put it simply, my professional career we started there. So I worked in the asset management industry for, as you say, well over 30 years, mainly in very large organisations, often the subsidiaries of global organisations, so firms like Fidelity, AXA, Legal & General, where you and I worked for a period of time, and more recently HSBC. So the large organisations, but with inside the asset management subsidiary within those firms. And then about 2-3 years ago, I decided to retire from that executive life and take up a little portfolio of non-executive roles. Sounds easy, take up a portfolio, because you start with nothing and then you have to use your network, your friendships, and your knowledge and skills, and we'll come to that later on, how important that is, where people have asked me to come and help them build businesses or recover, particularly after what's happened in the last couple of years. So, yeah, quite a varied career. And on a personal side, family man, nothing special, they're special to me, but I'm a family man, an avid cyclist, I am a mammal, and doing all the things that you do from team sports when you're younger, then individual sports as you get older, whether that's golf or skiing or cycling in my case.
Well, I was looking at what you've got behind you there, and I know you're going to turn around and go, "What the hell have I got behind me?"
Lots of different books.
Lots of different books, and I can see possibly something that might be a Vespa, model of a Vespa or something like that. There's
definitely got a little model of Vespa. The more important one is up there is the two Ducatis.
Oh, I couldn't see that. That was
so those are two. So that went through a phase of Ducatis, and if I tilt the screen up so you can see at the top, this little thing. Excuse me doing this. So this is a little brass thing which you can see, which is just cyclists, and that's my current hobby. So over time, I've tended to do hobbies and sports that involve speed and generally two wheels. I've never raced, I hasten to add, particularly on motorbikes. We used to go touring around Europe on the motorbikes quite a lot, and people say you're mad doing that on Ducati because they're small and perfectly formed, which I'd argue I was. But yeah, great fun. But motorbikes are quite dangerous. My wife's not too keen on me using those, so I put that hobby to one side for the time being. Although I was looking at a little Triumph last week, sneakily.
I've never been a motorbiker, as I say, but they well since gone now. But my mother and father were just after the war, they did, I had no idea, by the way, we're going to get into this conversation, but they did a tour of Germany, and she was riding 1,000cc bikes, back then in the sort of 1950, 1951, 52 sort of thing. And I didn't really know what that meant until, many years later. I went, actually, that's quite a big bike.
1,000cc in those days with drum brakes and very narrow tyres was brave. You're lucky to be here, Mark, because she might well have done what a lot of people do on Yamaha R1s and Gixxers these days, which is you've got bigger tyres and the engines are more powerful in terms of brake horsepower, but the principle is the same. The amount of rubber actually attached to the road at any point in time is quite small, and the speed you're going is disproportionate to the safety. So the beauty of going in Europe, since we're not physically there, is you can go very, very fast.
Yeah.
With less repercussions than you can in the UK. There's less traffic, better roads, and a population that generally are more inclined to forgive motorcyclists than try and knock them off, which tends to be the habit here.
Well, I'll move us on to the next question, but I'll leave a little segue in there with this just to see whether it comes up a little bit later on. The thing that I was sort of expecting to find somewhere in the background was that good old yellow jersey that you managed to put forward in motivation.
Well, you'll know, Mark. Part of my thing as a senior leader is to try and find useful parallels in other industries, because I think you can get very, very focused on what works in our sector. In practice, things that work in many, many sectors will work in ours as well. And one of the things that I became quite enamored of before it became too popular was this whole idea of continuous improvement, not from just reading about Kaizen with Toyota, but also from the British cycling team. But this was back in the early 2010s. When Jason Quealy had just won. I think we had a very successful Beijing in, was it 2012? No, 2008. So I use those examples rather than where people latching onto these ideas over the last 4 or 5 years. Perhaps I was a little bit early on that one. And as you say, we used to use the yellow jersey as a way of identifying staff who'd had made a particular contribution wherever they were in the organisation. I'm a big fan that you should recognise individuals' contribution, whether they're right at the bottom of the pyramid or right near the top of the pyramid. The plaudits shouldn't just go to those who score the goals. Sometimes there's other people who make an equally valid change or an equally valid contribution. I still remember these examples where you get, you may remember, somebody who's just in the post room, but says, I've just found a way of saving you. And the example that we had in Legal & General was someone saves £25,000 just by introducing a change to the way in which we ordered paper.
Yep.
Now that should be, you should laud that, not just say take it for granted. I think this is a way of getting organisations motivated, is letting people know that you're looking for examples of success and excellence or initiating change wherever it happens. Yeah, rather than just saying, there's 4 or 5 people who run a great big project, they get the plaudits often, but there's other people doing little things underneath. That's important.
Absolutely. I was just going to. We will get to the other questions eventually, but I can see this is going to be a good chat. That 25k. Relatively, is just as important as the £1 million new, earnings that you're going to make on a new product launch, or it could be a 500k saving that you're going to make from something else. It's because it's all relative and it's all, moving.
We all know that when organisations are looking to when they talk about leaner and fitter, they do go, well, what does that mean? Let's get rid of some staff, because it's very difficult to be leaner and fitter. Cut the training budget first, then the marketing budget, and then people. Now, I'd rather not cut people. Rather not cut any budgets, but you've got to keep that discipline there. And from the top down, you're so remote from what people are doing. It's very difficult to know what processes or what things can be improved. And one of the things I've learned through the years is people doing the job know best what could make it better.
Yeah.
So what you should do as a leader, as opposed to just a manager, managers tend to manage things, leaders lead people. Yeah. And I think one of the things important to do is to let them do their job to the best of their ability. You tend to get in the way. So the better thing to do is to say, look, if you've got a really good idea that you think could save us some money or make your process better or whatever else it is, speak to your line manager. And if they say, I think, and agree between you, if you want to do it, do it. If that person's if the line manager thinks it's nonsense, whatever else, don't be worried to escalate it. I'm not in a sort of formal process or whistleblowing. This is about just the organisation letting people challenge the norms,
making something happen.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be all sharp elbows. I don't want people coming in and disrupting the lines of accountability. But just let people know that if you've got a bright idea, raising it is welcomed. and it'll help the organisation rather than just sitting there and saying, they don't understand. Because I used to have a little mnemonic in my head, which is I am they. So when people say, oh, they don't understand, they mean I don't understand. Do you know what? They were normally right. So I would get my job not to understand, but to say, look, if you understand it better than me, provided we can't identify any real reasons for not doing something, let's just do it.
Well, I am they. We might have the title for this podcast here. We'll see whether there's any other gems.
Well, I guess I'm just conscious the term "they" now has changed in terms of things around inclusion and diversity, because obviously with this whole thing around LGBT plus, they is a particular term. But I'm comfortable with "I am they" from the point of view of as a management approach. It's a fine thing to do
with that. Lastly, before I move on, because this has been in my head for the last 3 or 4 minutes while we've been talking about this stuff. I'm sure you remember Mike Boardman. Obviously, essentially, I worked into Mike and delivering stuff. And I remember him saying, I can't remember whether it was us or whether it was me, in a sort of like one-to-one thing. But it was a little while after. You'd introduced, and then we all worked together on the Great Unit Trust business. I think, if I recall it right, at the time was the banner, if you like, that we were getting behind. And it was several months into it, and I remember him saying, Mike, I thoroughly enjoyed working for Mike, and he was incredibly knowledgeable about about how the business ran and that sort of stuff. And but also I remember him saying, I'm not sure I believed in it at first, but this fluffy stuff actually works, doesn't it? And it's absolutely true. And what we probably should be talking about this in about question 3 or 4, but there we go. One of the things that I try to say to people now, so I don't do what you do, but I help people with projects and how you should go about doing it and that kind of thing these days. In fact, I'm about to conduct a sort of a lessons learned and way forward with a small distribution company in the next couple of weeks who've implemented an ERP system. And what's going to be quite interesting is how they take forward the mix of stuff that they want. Had this big idea for them, and we had a few big ideas as well. Yeah. But also then they've got they wanted to change the culture in their organisation. So you've got to find the equivalent of these 25k type, relatively small ideas, if you like, but nevertheless you've got to find a way of delivering across the spectrum, not just the big ticket items, but the middle tickets, the smaller tickets, that all join up to the fluffier stuff, making the organisation go much further than everyone.
Well, you say it's fluffy stuff, Mark, but it's not fluffy. You see, it's really hard. And it's interesting. If I look at, for example, the regulator in our industry, FCA. They're now focused, they've identified that culture drives behaviours. And culture is about how do people within an organisation relate to each other? How do they interact with each other? How do they behave? And there's lots of things that people say, you set the tone from the top. Yes, you have to set the tone from the top. It has to filter all the way through the organisation. And what I've learned, and painfully, many times, because these things, you can read them in a book, but doing them is really hard. Yeah. Is people have got to have some sense of purpose. What are we trying to do? What are we, all of us, what are we trying to do here? And whether you call it vision or mission, I always think mission always sounds like something like you're going to space or something, but you've got to have a clear idea of what it is you're trying to build. That is the job of the leadership team to identify what that is. Then the skill is to communicate that in a way that is sufficiently engaging for people to say, yeah, I want to be part of that, as opposed to I want to be a spectator. You guys carry on and do that. And I've seen so many firms where they, senior management team, come up with a new vision of what they want the business to be. But there's little connection between that vision, which is normally written in some sort of corporate gobbledygook, of some, it's not even a castle on a hill. They just say, we want to be the world's leading da-da-da-da, or we want to be a top 5 player. Normally it's we want to be a top 5 or a top 10 in our industry. And from that very small senior leadership team, which they may have discussed with the chairman and the shareholders, the people underneath it, even the senior manager, are going, I'm not sure that's achievable. And then the further down the organisation you go, the more and more remote it becomes, and the more it looks like a pipe dream. So I'm not saying you should limit your ambitions to make it believable, But what it does say is what you've created needs to be understood and relatable all the way through the organisation. So people can look at it and say, even if they say, I'm not sure that's achievable, but I'll give it a go. Right? That's all I want. Give us a chance. So you should dream big, and you should try to get the whole organisation to come through. But you've got to think. There was a classic. I'm a bit of a magpie mind for sort of bon mot and stories. But there's a classic one. I'm never totally convinced it's true, about Napoleon. Napoleon would get all these generals in the tent. I'm sure you've heard this story. You got all the generals in the tent, and they designed the battle plan. It would all be agreed, and then Napoleon would say, right, bring in a private, and they'd get a private in, and they would have to explain to the private what they were going to do and what his role in it. And he said, if he doesn't understand what he's going to do, then the 10,000 members of the Grande Armée won't understand what to do either. And that, I think, is a really interesting example or analogy of if your day-to-day workers do not relate to what it is you want them to do and how you want them to do it, it will not happen. Because it's only when the whole organisation is moving towards a common objective at roughly the same pace, using roughly the same methods, you've got any chance at all of success.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Well, I am going to ask us the second question.
Oh, sorry, yeah,
that was absolutely fantastic. And there's probably something in this actually, in what we've just been talking about. So just thinking about, we've written the question on here as thinking about the last year, but it's not the last year, is it? It's almost 2 years now since this stuff all started happening to everybody around the world. But thinking about, say, I think it could be anything, but people, could be technology, could be the infrastructure, the business, the buildings and so on. What lessons will you take forward, or will you advise, I guess, in your career that you've got now, be taken forwards, and how do you see some of those things being delivered?
Well, that's a huge question, but I think there's two things which I think. Well, there's one thing which I think we've all learned, and there's another thing which I think we have to do. So what we've learned is that people can work effectively outside of a collective office environment. So people can work from home effectively, and they can be trusted to do so. Right? That's a really important point, isn't it? Be trusted. I think we've been through this idea of working from home. It's always like working from home. So, and they're walking the dog and taking the kids to school and the rest of it. Actually, which is nothing wrong with that, as long as they do the work. But this idea of you go into the office for 8:30, 9 o'clock, you work through to 5 and go home, that is not essential. There are many reasons why I think people should still be encouraged to go to the office as often as possible, because I do believe that innovation and sharing of knowledge and building the culture of an organisation can only be done collectively, properly. But I think we've learned now that there's no downside to being flexible, and there's probably quite a lot of upside. Having said that, when people say I'm much more productive at home, I'd like to say prove it. Yeah, you just feel better. You're not more productive. Anyway, that's what we've learned. Now, going forward, I think there's a much more important lesson, which is everyone's got really used to using technology now. And so I think any organisation that thinks it can go back to a customer service model or a business-to-business interaction model without using technology as the core of that proposition is doomed to die. In the conversations I'm having in the boards that I sit on now, it's all about how are we going to change our digital interaction with all of our different stakeholders, customers, suppliers, staff, etc., etc. I think whilst we've got all the tools, the knowledge and understanding of how to use them appropriately and where the forms of innovation are going to come, I think we're a little bit in the foothills of that. But if you'd said to, I think most of us 2 years ago, Zoom, we might have thought of an ice lolly from the 1970s. Now, I'm having Zoom calls with my family, that's people in their late 70s, through to 15-year-olds. We're all sitting on a Zoom call every Sunday at 6 o'clock. It's a lovely thing to do most of the time. That is relatives. But
they won't see this, Simon. You're all right.
Well, if they do, I don't mind, because they're probably thinking the same. But the fact is, Zoom is now part of everyday life. as is Teams or whatever else. One or two others are not so easy, but we would just people say a Zoom call.
Yeah,
let's have a Zoom.
It's the equivalent of the Hoover word, isn't it now? Zoom.
Exactly. So where we are is that the levels of comfort and happy reliance on technology across the entire population, certainly the population I know, I'm sure there's many people who don't have access to smartphones and things like that. So,
there are still too many that don't. But
apologies for them, and that's a societal issue. But amongst the people that I deal with in my business world or my social world, we're all very, very comfortable with the idea that you have a multimedia life. And as I said, I think it's essential that businesses think a lot harder about what they're doing in the digital world and how they're going to use technology, both from a hardware perspective, but also in terms of, and you've got many of your audience who talk about app developers and that sort of thing, but just how do we use it? I was talking at a board meeting this week, and we were talking about customer engagement. And the customer being the end consumer, people like you and me when we're buying services from advice practices or whatever else. And saying people will be much more comfortable with having an hour Zoom call rather than having to go to your office or you having to drive 50 miles to go and see them to do an hour meeting. Because the amount of time you waste going backwards and forwards and the money it costs, if I can do that in an hour, I can do a review meeting in an hour on the screen, why wouldn't I? Now so you can say, well, that's great because we're saving money. Possibly. I see it as an opportunity, which is what it means. We could be saying to clients, let's see each other a bit more often. Mm-hmm. Or rather just having a review meeting, what I might want to do is have a stimulation meeting. Let's sort of chew the fat or shoot the breeze or whatever phrase you want to use about what else is happening. Tell me a bit more about what's happening, because we don't normally get to talk about what's happening with your family and all that kind of stuff in a review meeting because we're trying to do the do. But let's just have a little bit more. So I think this is just an example of it's going to transform the way in which relationships in businesses work. We just don't know how. We can suppose, but the starting point is let's make sure you've got the right tech, that we trust the tech. And instead of looking at it as it's a way to save money or be more efficient because we can record the conversations or something like that, that's all good stuff. Talk about it as an opportunity.
Let me ask you this then, because I'm not going to ask you the planned question about users' confidence and using technology, because I think essentially we've covered that. But you, I may not quite get this articulation right, but somewhere in the last 4 or 5 months, I recall. I think I can't remember if it was a post from yourself or a comment on somebody else's post on LinkedIn, and essentially it was about making time for proper thought in decision making on taking strategy forward, and it was something along the lines of, yes, we all say we're going to do these things at our kickoff year meetings or half year meetings or something like that, but bloody hell, isn't it hard to actually then follow through and put that proper time aside for thinking about the business rather than working in the business or something along those sorts of lines. So I guess the question is related to what we've just been talking about. So, you're looking at it as an opportunity there. So, is there a way then, is that what we should be doing? Should we be essentially saying, well, hang on a minute, we used to travel all these places to have these board away days and blah blah blah, and maybe we should having a catch up meeting on this topic or a strategy meeting on that topic. Is that a way forward? Do you think that because I'm a great believer in whilst as you know, I live in the world of projects, therefore I have methods and frameworks and stuff like that help me to do things. So I do believe in having a framework, having a guide, and having a method. But I'm not a believer in that one size fits all, and I'm not a believer in not breaking it when you don't need to. But I do think that if you have some kind of framework that encourages the debate, then you're more likely to make progress. So I wonder whether there's an opportunity in that to that principle a few months ago.
I think that's broadly right, Mark. There's a lot of themes in there. So let's just take a couple of things. The first is one of the dangers of working digitally is it encourages you to try and do things quickly. The information is ubiquitous. The tools are designed to work quickly and hopefully intuitively, and attention spans have been increasingly limited because people can get gratification of their inquiry or whatever it is they're trying to do really, really quickly. And that's great. And then the second thing you mentioned is about having a framework for thinking. The thing about frameworks for thinking is you're already creating some limits because you're trying to process. You're trying to get something which is perhaps ethereal or half-formed and get it into a funneling process so you can end up with it being a deliverable of some form or another. I've got a couple of concerns that's attached to both of those angles, there's one primary concern, which is you have to set time aside to just think. Mm-hmm. Now, it used to be, you're talking about going on trains and travelling around and things like that, hopefully not driving. That's good thinking time.
Yeah,
they're not always used to thinking time. I might just go to sleep or watching movies on iPlayer. But I think you do have to have some thinking time. And I often think, what are the advantages of some of the richest people in the world? Not because they're rich. Money buys you time.
Yeah.
And you see some of these people, they seem to be gurus, incredibly intelligent people. One of the luxuries that they have is time to think. And actually, that time to think gives them an even greater advantage. So if I look at someone like, let's say, Warren Buffett, for example. Now, I don't know Warren Buffett at all. I don't know what his methods are. I know what his numbers look like. But I suspect that a lot of people around Warren Buffett are doing a huge amount of really, really detailed technical work. And he's leaning back and going, I wonder what if Heinz didn't do that and they did something different. He's thinking about, not just global macroeconomics, but just where's this going? And it's quite, so I try and take time, or make time to read stuff and think about stuff that's not straight up and down the wicket, to use a cricketing expression. So if we take that example, are you reading stuff about what futurologists are talking about and thinking about? I like looking at what's happening in other industries. I have a bit of a sort of Renaissance mind, if you like. I like looking broadly and getting all these different inputs, because I think it just helps you to then go, so if that's happening there and that's happening there, why wouldn't that happen here? So if I come back to this digital thing, we're looking at how does the financial services industry get better at digital? We're great at things that save us money and give us better processes in the back office, but when it comes to doing stuff that engage customers, we're poor. And then you look at what people who make their money out of managing customers, from Google, Facebook, Amazon, and others. What are they doing? Well, we should be looking at what they're doing, not because they're going to come and do it to us. They might. But they're doing stuff which their customers, which is our customers too, they've got more than we have, their customers seem to enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
So why don't we try and make them enjoy the experience with us? If they've shown us the way to create an enjoyable experience, maybe we should be learning from them rather than trying to defend from them. So this is the thing about thinking. I think you just have to. This is what good chief executives do. It's what really good chairmen do of PLCs. Is they're looking beyond our horizon to other people's horizons, saying, what's going on? What are people doing? Why are people behaving in this way? Today, why have consumer sales dropped off? Why is that happening? People have got more money in their pockets than they've had for ages because they haven't been spending it. So why aren't they spending it? What does that tell us? I haven't got a clue. It was literally in the news this morning, and I thought, that's a really interesting little factoid. What's that telling me?
So let's ask the last question in this part of the interview then, Simon, because it's.
I'm sorry if I haven't stayed on track, but you do.
You know me, I'm not that bothered about the track that we're running on. You might just say repeat previous answer, but what's the best piece of business or career advice that you've been given?
Yeah, I don't want to pin it down to one person or one piece of advice. And I think over, the 40 years I've been in this industry, 42 years, sadly, since I graduated and started in this industry, I've learned things as I've gone along, and the industry's changed. So you have to keep refreshing, you have to keep thinking. So the things that I have learned, there's 2 or 3 sort of really important things. The first is know your stuff. I think, blagging your way through. I had a couple of really good CEOs, and they used to ask, I say they give 3 questions. Question 1 would be a citer, just to test that we agreed on what we were talking about. The second one would be a prober, and the third one would knock you over unless you knew your stuff. And that third question is the one you're looking out for. So know your stuff. Second thing, work hard. There's no substitute for hard work. That doesn't mean to say you've got to do hours. It's not the number of hours, it's the quality of hours. But you've got to work hard if you want to be successful. I'm sorry, but that's just a fact of life.
Yeah, and just to close it off, for this.
I haven't finished yet. I was going to say one other one, and this is the thing that I probably.
No, there was 3.
No, the third. This is the thing that's come to me a bit later in life, and I regret it in a way, which is about caring. And I don't mean caring in the sort of broad social sense. I always cared about success. Then I cared more about customers. I cared for the customers rather than about them as a way of getting my success, and caring for staff. And what I hadn't really fully appreciated is in being successful, I think a lot of people in my generation, it may apply to others, were more concerned about their own success and running, in the hamster wheel, doing as well as you could and beating off the competition and showing all your friends and everybody else how successful you were. And it meant you tried to get people around you who could make you successful. And what I've learned of the last 4 or 5 years in particular is the value of having people around you and customers and people who were awkward, or different. They now call it diversity and inclusion. And I've always liked working in eclectic teams with people. I remember I had a sales team at Henderson's many, many years ago. He said, "You've got some odd people in your team." I loved it because they were all bringing in these different contributions. We didn't talk about diversity then. I just like working with a whole bunch of weird people. But I've really come to value the idea of bringing in different ideas and different people. And I'll finish on this. I've not been aware of a thing called neurodiversity, which is quite a recent awakening for me. But the idea that there are people who've got skills and knowledges, but their approach is not one that would work easily. So you're sitting in a team meeting. Who's the quiet person in the corner who's not saying anything, or the person over at the other corner, or maybe in the middle, who's saying something? And you're like, "Oh, for God's sake, you keep banging on about that." Their contribution is still valuable. You should value that person and their contribution, even if it seems to come from a weird place, because actually, it's their personality, their neurodiversity, as the expressions come through. And I could give you examples. It's just that they're not wired like me. I'm clearly an outgoing, standard sort of alpha white male, middle-aged person. So I fit easily into the corporate life. But the people who don't fit easily into that, but their contributions are as valuable. That's the thing. My final piece is care for people. Let them sing their little song. I shouldn't have said little. Let them sing their song, and you'll find that will improve the quality of the understanding and the decision making as you go along.
I think, I've not heard it expressed that way before. I love the way you've just expressed that. I think that's a fabulous, just that one little last nugget that, all the things you've said in the last 20 minutes or so have been great. But I think that's a fantastic piece of advice to anyone, whether they are, taking on their first supervisory position, for example, or whether they're the chair of the biggest PLC in the land, I think.
It comes, I come from a big family, so I'm used to fighting for airtime around a Christmas dinner table. And there'll be 12, 14 of us, and it'll be loud and rowdy, and I'll get more than my fair share of airtime because of my personality. But I now know the 2 or 3 members of the family who might feel overwhelmed by that, and they might look outwardly very happy, but I wonder if they're really happy because they're not being able to have their moments. And so, from a family environment through to a business, how many meetings have you been or conferences have you been to where people with really interesting things to say will never know because they never got to say them?
Yeah, indeed. Well, that's Simon Ellis, everybody, in part one of this PHIT podcast. So we'll draw that bit to a close.